Well, let me just preface by apologizing to viewers for my past MAGA activism and my support of Donald Trump. When Trump ran, I fell for the lies that he would drain the swamp and would root out corruption. And he was correct in pointing out the graft and the fraud and the abuse. But what he has done is he has continued to enrich himself and his own family at the expense of the American people. I realized that Trump was lying and that I had allowed myself to believe these lies, which eventually led to my leaving of MAGA. And I think that there are more than ever who are in the MAGA community who right now are having doubts about their support for Donald Trump. We have a nationwide billboard campaign, and our message is very simple on the campaign. It's having doubts, you're not alone. And for those who might be seeing this, who right now are starting to question their beliefs, are starting to perhaps feel confused, they're wondering if the MAGA movement comports with their values anymore, we want them to know that they're not alone. And I think the president knows that he is losing support. I believe that many in MAGA do have a red line. I think when people reach that line of demarcation, when there is one lie or one betrayal too many, it starts to make them wonder and question if this is a movement that they can continue to support. And I think that Trump continues to abuse his office and the office of the president recklessly. And I think that many in MAGA are starting to recognize that.
You know, Rich, you touch on a lot of pieces there that really, I think a lot of folks around the country wondered, and you've given some light and some answer to that. You know, how is this playing in various pockets of the MAGAverse, if you will, and how people who, like yourself, have said, you know what, this is not what I signed up for. And it reminded me a lot of the early days of the Tea Party. A lot of those were individuals, were grassroots activists, Republicans who were very frustrated with the Republican Party's lack of consistency around the constitutional norms that they professed, the idea that they were for a smaller government footprint, that they wanted keep the expenses to the American people low, and so they were mad about the cost of the Iraq War and the impact that was having. And you see those parallel universes in this moment for a lot of folks, and it really is, I think, an important inflection point, Skye, to what Trump is trying to achieve. Luke and I grew up here in D.C., and what we're seeing happen to the city that we grew up in is the Trumpification.
Yes.
I call it the crapping on the city, because he's squatting everywhere and he's leaving a very big butt print.
Yeah.
All right. Just to put it out there, look at what he's touching. Look at what he is changing into his own image, from the mall to the reflecting pool, not the reflection pond, to the skyline of the city, to the White House itself. And now we've got this $1.7 billion fund. So here's the thing. While all of that's going on, that's one distraction away from the grift, which is the ultimate game. Because while we're fussing about an arch, he's having the IRS drop $1.7 billion into his pocket. So stay focused, people.
Right.
Here's the question for you. So what? Who's going to stop him? How do you stop him? Republicans in Congress might as well just take the trash bags and the briefcases with the money in it and take it down to the Oval Office and put it on his desk, because that's all you're worth at this point. That's all you're worth. You ain't doing a damn thing about it. You're sitting silent, or you're egging it on. So how does this change?
Well, I think, and we talk about this all the time, the people are the ones that are going to stop it. And you already see there are defections starting within the MAGA movement. You're already seeing that. And these billboards and people across the country in red areas like I grew up in, people understand corruption. They don't like grift. They also, by the way, don't like their voting rights being taken away from them. Like, regardless of political party, people value the right to vote. So that's one piece is the elections in November, which is why they're trying to decimate the voice of the people now, because they don't want to be held accountable by the people. The other piece is don't rest on the federal courts. Now, the federal courts are not able to stop every single thing he does. They're not. And we're not going to pretend like they are. But at the end of the day, this is an administration that is facing over 750 lawsuits, the largest in history. They're losing all the time. And often in their game of whack-a-mole, they actually back off when you confront them. And that's why it's so puzzling what members of Congress are doing.
Right.
And what Republican members of Congress are doing, or people that just don't agree with the president. Like, what are they doing? Because this is a president that is not impervious to political and social pressure from the people. We see that all the time. He'll change his tune in a minute, but yet why is Congress sitting there? But the people are going to have the voice, and the people are going to be the ones that will stop him.
Rich, I'm sure you heard the sound from the president on Tuesday. He was asked to what extent Americans' financial situation is motivating his making a deal with Iran. He had said not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. Well, just in the past hour, there was an interview with the president and Bret Baier that aired on Fox News. Bret Baier asked the president about criticisms of what he had said, and here's the president given an opportunity to revise and extend.
It's very simple. When people hear me say it, everybody agrees. Short-term pain. It's going to be short-term pain. But the pain is much less than people thought.
Rich, does everyone agree? Is the pain less than people thought?
Well, I think most Americans would disagree with that statement. I think that Americans, many of whom voted for the president in 2024 with the hope that costs would be lowered, that their groceries, their gas, their health care, their housing costs would be lowered. And for many of them, what they're discovering is that not only have costs remained high, but for many, the costs are even higher right now and than they were in 2024. And with a lot of regret and remorse, I talk in my memoir about some of the reasons why I supported the Trump campaign. I did believe as an outsider that he would disrupt the status quo. And unfortunately, we did get a disruptor, but one who is anathema and antithetical to democracy. And I write in the memoir as well about not only reasons that people fell prey to MAGA, but how hard it is for someone to walk away from MAGA. But it is possible to do it. And I think that the cracks are showing right now. I think the chasms are going to continue to widen because of the fact that the president is not keeping his promises. And I believe that many in the base right now are starting to recognize that the president is a dishonest person. I think most people in MAGA deep down know that something is amiss in the country. I said at the DNC convention on night one, I worked on the Kamala campaign, that Trump's toxic superpower is lying. And I think there's no issue, small, medium, or large, that the president is not willing to lie about.